we're super blessed to have you both on. I've been following both of you for a decent amount of time now. Brittney, I've been listening to a ton of different podcasts that you've done. Just some awesome guests. I was listening to the Gary Thomas one not too long ago, and man, you just have a great way with words, with talking about these concepts and trying to help that intersection of faith and mental health. So it's great to have you on. And Kristina, we said it last time when you were on, we said we got to bring you back on to talk about mental health, because, you know, you talked a lot about relationships, comedy, but you have this other side, a whole nother hat that's, you know, I think equally as cool, maybe even cooler than the comedy. So I'm sure you'll be pretty funny as we go anyways, because you're just a funny person in general. So me and Brittney, we'll try to keep up. We won't be able to, but that's okay.
And for those who don't know, Kristina is also my best friend. So we're both excited to be sharing together.
We were saying
For
we
sure.
live 2 miles away, and we were like, no, we need our own spotlight. So let's do this at our own houses.
The two ring lights, the ring lights are important on the Zooms. As you can see, my setup is getting more and more extra by the week. I almost feel ashamed of it by this point. So
That's great.
Yeah. So to get us started off, first of all, just like interact a little bit with sort of what I've presented. Do you think that this picture that I painted about churches, you know, not doing as well as they could, do you think that this is true? Like, do you see the church and think we could be doing a better job? Do you think I'm over exaggerating? And I always tell our guests, you do not have to agree with what I say. We
Right.
actually like it when there's a little bit of spicy disagreement. But so maybe just both speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that you actually shared one of the stats that I saw, and that was in a Lifeway research study of acute diagnosis where they surveyed 1,000 Protestant pastors, and you know, a majority of them were not speaking about mental health in their church. And they did find that also, I think it was 59% of pastors who had counseled someone did go on to receive an acute diagnosis. So it's definitely evident that people who are experiencing mental health challenges that are more severe are kind of going through the gateway of pastors and the church. And research for over 20 years has shown that when a person is struggling with psychological distress, they will go to their church before they ever step foot to a mental health professional. And that's why I've been so passionate about this conversation, because we know that the church is on the front lines. Many of us, I think, who are watching and have been there, we went to the church first with our distress, where we found that social support that was helpful, but maybe not so practical. And I know that was the case for me. I'd served in church for years with youth and young adults, encountering a lot of suicidality, trauma, and all these severe issues, and finding that we were lacking the resources and the understanding of what was going on, which kind of led me to end up going back to UCLA to study this more clinically and understand that aspect. But I do think there are kind of, from what I've seen, 3 types of spaces that churches are in when it comes to the mental health conversation. So there are those who completely just say it's 100% spiritual, right? And they don't believe in the jargon of psychology. And I get the terms that are like, Jesus is the only counselor, you know? And so I've gotten that. And then there are the people who are in the middle who may not be talking about it a lot and may not have a lot of resources. And it's not that they don't have a heart for people. It's not that they are meaning to harm people. They have good intentions, but they just don't know where to start. They just don't understand the full mental health conversation or where to begin. And then there are those who are really interested, and they're actively, you know, inviting. I've had people who invite me to have discussions, have panels, who invite mental health professionals to come and speak. So I definitely can't generalize and say all churches, but these tend to be the areas that I see churches kind of on a spectrum progressing through. So that's my experience.
Kristina, do you have anything to add to that? Do you feel like you've seen similar things from your end as well?
Yeah, I mean, that was brilliant. I think that the church is doing a better job now, and it's because there has been so many tragedies and so much media attention around things like suicidality, and so people are questioning, like, okay, how common is this? And one of the things that I learned working at the residential center is that it is very common for people to have passive suicidal thoughts. And so what that means is that they have these thoughts about wanting to die, but they're like they have no plans to act on it. And that being said, it's actually very normal to have thoughts where you want to negate pain. And so at the core of it, people just want pain to stop. And so the church, like Brittney's saying, is the place people go to find, how can I stop this pain? And so I think now there's like a fusing of science and church, and people are like, oh, what does it mean to be trauma informed? What does it mean, to be delivered, to be healed? Like, what do these terms mean, and how can we maybe become more knowledgeable about the psychological responses, the brain, the amygdala, like the things in our bodies that very much impact our day-to-day lives.
Brittney, speak a little bit. You said that people are more likely to go to a church before they'll go to a counselor. And you talked a little bit about your time in ministry. I don't know how long ago that was. Do you think that still is the case, that for a lot of people, the first place they would go is a church? Or do you feel like because the church has done such a poor job, do you think it has shifted a little bit away? Because maybe it's just my experience, and I don't want to generalize to everyone, but I would see a lot more people being less likely to share with anyone in a church environment.
Yeah, I do still believe, again, this is just my inference, that people are still going to the church first. And this is not a new thing. This is actually very historical, kind of around medieval times. Oftentimes it was the monasteries that were converted into places of care for those who are physically sick, mentally sick, or travelers passing by. So the church has always kind of been this foundational place for soul care, even though our methods may have been more questionable, as I think anyone's methods were in that day when you are dealing with mental health and can't see the brain and don't have technology. But I do believe people are going to the church. Maybe they don't fully understand what is going on with their mental health. They may not know that it's bipolar. They may not know that it's BPD. They may not know that it's depression. They may not know that it's anxiety. They just know, like Kristina said, that they feel pain, they feel distress, and they want it to be relieved. And so for a lot of people, I do believe that they are going to the churches as a front line for sure. One more thing.
Yeah, go for it.
The other reason why I think that is because a lot of people on a basic level do not understand how to navigate the mental health care system. It's very difficult, even for someone who is not struggling with a severe mental health condition, to figure out how to go about finding a therapist, affording a therapist. So even this, when we're speaking in terms of accessibility of getting mental health care, I think there are some barriers there that people are struggling with, or have never gone to. Their family has never gone to therapy. Nobody that they know has ever done it, especially when we get into cultural spheres where it's not a thing in certain cultures, so people don't think to go, but they'll go to their church. And so that's where, as a church, we also need to learn how to navigate resources so that we can help other people navigate them, for sure.
Yeah, we got a good question in the chat. Andrew says, and feel free, anyone who's listening, feel free to put stuff in the chat, and we'll try to hit as many as we can as we go. So this can be a four-person conversation, right? The three of us and all of you as the fourth. Mental health used to not be talked about in the generation before most of us. Now that it's becoming a bigger issue in the church, do you think it should be a requirement for pastors to have some level of psychology? What would your guys' thoughts be on that? My initial hunch would be yes, but would either of you disagree?
I asked a pastor this because I was like, how do you deal with people who come in and they say that I'm struggling with depression or, wanting to die, or what do I do? And he said that he hires a psychologist to have on staff when needed. And I think there's something to say about being able to delegate what is not necessarily your level, place of expertise, and pastors can't do everything. I think it would be phenomenal if they had some type of psychological background or classes, but obviously we can't expect everyone to be able to do everything. We don't know their lives. And so to have the resources And also, I just want to say that one of the biggest things that I had to unlearn from the generation prior, like through my mom and that generation, was that black and white thinking is very much something in the church where things are very black and white. And that was that generation. And in psychology and in therapy, a lot of what you do is try to deter from black and white thinking and realize there's a huge gray area and you're just navigating the gray area and things are not black and white. And that was like, very different from what I feel like we were raised in.
Yeah. Jordana, she says, my church has a psychologist on staff and they do a 2-session max, but then provide a list of local counseling that may best fit the person's needs. So yeah, from my own experience, I went to counseling for a little while, about a couple years ago, and I found the list. My church had a big list like that was, here's a bunch of counselors, and most of them were Christians who were counselors rather than Christian counselors, if that makes sense. And Brittney, you had a whole podcast episode about this, but do you feel like some of the aversion to sending people, saying we want to have our people go to counseling or encouraging staff members or pastors to get counseling, is fears about counselors who are not Christians? So like what would be the way that you would speak into that to say, should Christians be looking only for Christian counselors explicitly, or is any counseling good? How would you help kind of assuage some of those fears?
Yeah, this seems to be a really big controversy. And I did just do a podcast episode with Dr. Holly Oxhandler. She's a PhD of social work at Baylor, and she does a lot of research on how faith is integrating into therapies for people. And what they did find in some of their research is that people do want faith integrated into their therapy sessions. People tend to heal faster as well when they're having these faith practices integrated into their therapy. But I do think that there is a fear of kind of outsourcing people to therapists, because there's this fear, I think, of people being deceived because you're dealing with their mind and being tricked into some type of philosophy that is outside of the Christian sphere. And I think for anyone who has actually gone through therapeutic training or has had any type of education just knows that that is unethical. Like, you cannot do that. Like, no matter what you believe, unless you have some type of private practice where you are individually counseling people and integrating these prayer, scripture reading into your practice, it's unethical to push your beliefs onto people or trying to persuade them to change their beliefs. I think a competent and trained therapist is really going to meet you where you are and just help give you the skills to realign your thoughts, to reframe your thoughts. Like you said, like earlier, medication if necessary, sometimes it's biological, and really just help you assess what's going on and really help guide you into a place where you are aligning with your own convictions and your personal convictions. So I am of the belief that it is better to get help than no help at all. I try to see mental health like physical health. Sometimes it's like a cold and it happens briefly and then it kind of goes away. Sometimes it's like, I don't know, something more serious and ongoing. And sometimes it's like, maybe diabetes, it's chronic and you have to continue managing it. Sometimes it's like you're in the ICU and you're just trying to hold on and you need a lifeline and you need something. And I think it's better to get the help, get the assessment, figure out what's going on, at least until you can find someone who you feel is a better fit for you. Because at the end of the day, they have the training, they have the evidence-based resources that can help you, and you deserve the help and the support. And so I don't think that should be a barrier, but at least start somewhere, and then you can build to finding something that fits you more if that's what you want. Yeah.
Kristina, in your practice, we got a question. Do you think a non-Christian therapist can still bring your faith into healing during counseling? So I'm assuming not everyone who you work with is a Christian. Have you seen them being able to integrate those things?
Yeah, it's actually not a Christian. It's a very, it's like a Yale, in partnership with Yale Treatment Center. So it's not Christian based. But I actually have found that an excellent therapist is someone like Brittney says, who meets you where you're at, which means that they are respecting you and bringing into life like your core values while navigating the trauma and the things that you're going through. And so that's the purpose, is to provide healing and recovery. So they very much respect that, and faith and a higher power. And this belief is something that is very much integrated into recovery. I actually, when my mom passed away from brain cancer, and she didn't do chemo and radiation because she believed she'd be healed. And she's charismatic. Like at that point, I think it had impacted her processing. But for me, I needed to go to a non-Christian therapist in order to navigate my grieving and my healing, because it was a safe person outside of the experience that could understand the trauma without imposing their kind of personal beliefs. And so I think that's super important. So absolutely. Yeah.
What would be your take? There's lots of verses in the Bible that are about love one another, bear one another's burdens. How would you counsel a group of friends and they're trying to be there for each other? At one point, like if on one end of the spectrum, you could have them say, hey, I'm going to abdicate my responsibility to you as a friend. And I'm going to say, the moment you start bringing up anything hard, go see a therapist, go see a therapist. That's the first line of defense. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, trying to shoulder that all themselves. What would you feel like is a good, healthy way for friends to know, like, when is this something beyond my capacity as a Christian brother or sister serving my other Christian brother, friend, or sister, or even a Christian and a non-Christian, where they're just trying to show them the love of Jesus in regular relationships? And when would it cross over into being that I need to help this person find someone who is more of an expert and can give them more directed care?
Yeah. Something that came to mind right away was something that someone mentioned in the chat. I think it was Amy, and she mentioned mental health first aid. And I actually was certified in that as well. And it's a really great training that I recommend everyone do, whether you are a layperson in the church or a leader, where you just learn how to identify the basic signs of when it is something more serious. So speaking to your question, Anthony, like one of the main things I try to get people to focus on is functionality. Like, how able are they to function through daily life? Because that's really what clinicians and therapists are looking at when it comes to the severity of their mental health, right? So if they are unable to work, or they're unable to get out of bed, or they're having panic attacks, and it's just getting really extreme for more days than not, they're experiencing this in a way that is debilitating to their life, their relationships, their work. That is a clear sign that there is something more going on, and that it is more than likely beyond us and should probably be taken to a therapist or a professional. And so I think it's really important to know our roles. It's just like you mentioned earlier, if someone breaks their leg or if they're sick, a lot of times we will take them to the hospital, or we'll bring them food, or we'll, maybe drive them there or visit them. We'll do these things. So we can translate that to mental health as well, where it's like, hey, I don't have all the answers for this, but I am more than happy to help you find the resources or find someone who knows more in this area. And maybe you help them do the internet search for the nearest, mental health treatment center, because they don't have the energy they can't get out of bed. Or maybe you're visiting them there, or bringing them food. Just all of these things we can do to just be a genuine and natural support alongside them without feeling the need to be a savior and have this savior syndrome, because then that stresses and burns us out, and the lines get blurred in that relationship. So just being very clear with ourselves about what we can do and what is beyond us, and what we can do to help facilitate them to those resources, and walk with them along the way. We can walk with them as they are on the journey of their own healing process. We don't do the healing for people. That's unrealistic.
Yeah, definitely.
I have a joke along these lines. I used to say that small group leaders are basically unlicensed therapists. The things that people say in small groups, it's like, sometimes you're like, okay, like, what do I do with that information? So, yeah.
That's good. They're unlicensed therapists. They could probably benefit from that first aid kit that Brittney mentioned, and they mentioned in the chat. Mike says, one of the biggest things that I have had to wrestle with in my own journey with mental health is, where is Jesus when my anxiety is going crazy? I'm sure that many Christians are still asking these questions as we suffer from these kinds of difficulties on this earth. What is your take on this question? Maybe Kristina, how would you respond to something like that?
Yeah, I definitely struggle with anxiety. And I have learned that it is just a spectrum of thoughts that is normal. And it's just a signal that there is something else going on that maybe, we say you can address vulnerability. So like, have you eaten today? Like, did you not sleep well? Like, those things are factors that can very much play into anxiety and thoughts and recurring thoughts. And so I typically practice self-care when I feel my anxiety levels rising. And so these are tools and tips that I use, or a practice called mindfulness, which is something that brings you down and brings you present into the moment, to be aware of where your body is, that you ultimately are this tiny little human on this earth in a universe that's so big. And if that is all functioning and running without you doing anything, certainly like your life is okay without you having to assess these thoughts, just allowing them to be and continue to live. And so Jesus is very much there. And I think actually you don't even need to give the attention to the anxiety sometimes.
That's good. Andrew, he asks, back to the basics, could you define depression? If someone is feeling depression, what would you recommend their first step be towards getting better?
Yeah, I would say that anytime that you feel like something's off or you're not feeling yourself, that's probably a sign to start getting help. I am of the belief that we can be preventative. Like, we don't have to wait until it's a full-blown crisis and someone is full-blown at suicidal thoughts, like, I don't know what to do with my life. I think the moment that you feel like you're off and your thoughts are spiraling out of control, or you're feeling debilitating, is the time to go. Like, if you're having the thought, that's probably your sign to start with. And so again, looking at professional help. I mean, I could always go through the practicality of that. A lot of times first, people can go through their insurance. If you have health insurance, that's a great place to start, because you'll have providers within your coverage. You can go on online directories like psychologytoday.com. You can even filter for a Christian therapist. You can even ask for referrals, maybe from people that that you've heard have gone through therapy. So yeah, definitely starting there. And when it comes to assessing depression, there very much is a clinical assessment that's happening. So I want to make that clear. Like, you're not going to walk into a therapy office and it's like, yeah, you're depressed. I mean, they shouldn't do that. It's unethical. They'll actually have you fill out a kind of a questionnaire, like, have you been experiencing hopelessness? Have you been experiencing lack of sleep? Have you been experiencing lost pleasure in the things that you typically enjoy? Have you been experiencing suicidal thinking at all? Like, there's kind of this checklist of criteria that you have to meet, and having met them for, say, more than 2 weeks, maybe some months or more, for a prolonged time, for it to be considered depression. So I do want to make it clear that clinicians and therapists do have a set criteria that does meet depression. And this is a way of having a nomenclature or a naming system that no matter where you go, it's assessed kind of the same levels across the board at any therapist that you kind of see. And that is how you find out, is you go and you get an assessment, and they can let you know. And there's nothing better than knowing. I think that relieves a lot of the shame and stigma. When you're just feeling like something's wrong with you, but you don't know what it is and you don't know why, you really internalize a lot of that shame. But then what I find is that the moment that they go see someone sees a therapist or they get help, and that therapist kind of names what's going on and says, okay, this is what's going on. Like, these are the signs and these are common signs. While some people might be afraid of receiving a diagnosis, other people also on the other side feel relieved, because they're like, oh my gosh, I thought that I was just going crazy. Like, I thought something was just wrong with me. No, this is a thing. And I can get treatment now based on this to move forward. So if you are feeling in any way off, or feeling like you may need more help, that is a sign to go. And it'll be so helpful to know, so you can know how to move forward.
Okay, one last question, because we're just about out of time, and this is an easy one. How can people find you two? What's the best place to follow you? How can they get more of this, super, super helpful content and wisdom and all that stuff? What's the best place for people to find? And we can drop this in the chat. I'm actually going to ask Andrew Kirschman if you can drop this in the chat, bud. You're going to do great.
You can find me at the DTR Blog on all the socials. Instagram is where I'm most active. Twitter is where I'm most spicy, and Facebook I forgot about kind of. TikTok when I'm feeling creative and like I'm 16 again. and I have a blog.
Oh my gosh, I love it. She just changed her Twitter name to like Feisty Church Woman or something. What is
Edgy woman
of faith. Like
Feisty,
edgy woman of faith. That's really
or someone said something about Theo girl, and I was like, oh, I should change it to edgy Theo girl.
Edgy Theo girl. I like it.
Because what is Theobrogen? That's the new one, right?
Yeah, I make fun of it's like cool guys who know the Bible.
I'm a Theo Brogen.
Theo bro.
I love that.
Yeah.
So for me, you can find me kind of in all the places. I'm also more active on Instagram. I am, it's at Brittney Moses, and then I'm on Twitter at Brittney_Moses. I think the place I like to direct people is the website, BrittneyMoses.com. It kind of houses everything. I'm trying to get on YouTube and keep up with the kids. And then we have the podcast that you mentioned earlier, the Faith and Mental Wellness podcast, where we have conversations with both mental health professionals and those with lived experience to get both sides of the conversation. And it's centered in faith. I mean, we have conversations like from pastor to psych ward, like a pastor who ended up in a psych, really amazing stories, testimonies, and information that's out there. So definitely check out the podcast.
Well, thank you both so much. This has been such a blessing to the community. If everyone could put thank you in the chat for both of them coming.